It was shortly after 4 o'clock when Jack reached the mayor's office. It was on the second floor of a 2-story building. Jack opened the door and went straight up the stairs. He stepped in the lobby and asked the receptionist to see the mayor. He explained who he was and the reason for his visit. "I'm sorry," she said. "He's left for the day. You'll have to come back on Monday." Jack suspiciously looked to the closed office door. He thanked the receptionist and then headed down the stairs. As he rounded the corner of the building, Jack looked back up to where the window of the mayor's office would be. He saw a silhouette of a man parting the curtains, looking down at him. Jack stopped and stared back, but the light turned off and the curtain fell shut. "Who does this guy think he is?" thought Jack. On his way home, Jack walked by the unmistakable storefront of a bar. His gait slowed some, and his palms grew moist with sweat as he contemplated going in. He thought better of it and walked back to his apartment. Jack spent his evening unpacking, cooking up some noodles, and reading a book he found under the bed about a college professor trying to solve a murder. After reading about 100 pages and trying to make it interesting, he finally threw the book across the room into a wastepaper basket. He leaned back on the bed and noticed how quiet it was. No police sirens, no honking cars. But it wasn't just that. There was something different about this place, something in the air. Jack was uneasy. A street light was shining through his window into his eyes, so he got up and walked across the room. As he went to shut the curtain, he looked down onto the street. At the base of a street light, the silhouette of a man stood, looking up at him. Jack stared back for a moment, and then the man turned away, walking into the darkness. Work was strenuous the next day, but it wasn't anything Jack wasn't used to. Paul turned out to be a decent boss, at least so far. Jack met Sujin, the mountain of a chef. For his size, Sujin moved quickly and gracefully in the kitchen, pumping out orders with record speed and due care. While Jack was slicing onions, he couldn't help but notice the multitude of tattoos all over his body. One of them, on his right forearm, Jack recognized as a prison tattoo. He wondered if Sujin was on probation as well. Taking up the whole of Sujin's left arm was a great, lanky, black and white striped, dancing figure. Its face was mask-like, with large, round eyes. Something about the tattoo entranced Jack. He had a hard time looking away. It was just so awkward in its pose and positioning, like the movement was all backwards. He was so lost in the strangeness of it that he didn't hear Paul come up behind him. "Hayoka," said Paul, startling Jack. "It's a Lakota tradition, like a trickster god. Is he..." "Sujin? No," said Paul. Said Jack, and went back to his work. The frantic pace of the restaurant didn't slow down until around 10:30. Around then, Paul told Jack to take a break, and Jack took off his apron and was headed out of the kitchen when he heard Sujin shout something. Jack turned around to see Sujin handing him an enormous plate of food. "Breakfast," said Sujin. Jack thanked him and took the plate. He then sat down at an empty booth and examined the plate. It looked like a car wreck, a mountain of hash, potatoes, and chaos. "And I was just thinking to myself that at this point anything would taste good," said Jack under his breath. Jack rationalized that if he survived prison food, he could survive this. He dug in, and to his surprise, the dish was incredible. An explosion of flavor overtook his senses. Eggs, meat, vegetables, everything was at just the right proportion. And the textures, tender potatoes that seemed to be filled with a lava core of cheeses mixed with a crunchy, satisfying grizzle of salty hash. Every bite was so unbelievably good that it had to be challenged to another. Jack was halfway through the plate, and he had to stop himself. Back in the kitchen, he spoke up. "Sujin, that was amazing. Where did you learn to cook like that?" Sujin stopped what he was doing, turned to Jack, and grinned an impossibly large grin. "The One taught me." "What?" said Jack skeptically. Jack's sharp response was at once to hearing his parole officer called The One. What kind of delusional egomaniac was this guy anyway, thought Jack. But the other surprise was hearing a thick Anglo-Russian accent come barreling out of Sujin's mouth.
"You don't think I learned this in prison, do you?"
"I know you didn't learn this in prison."
"I leave prison. I come here. Can't cook cereal. Have much anger. Or we say, Sujin, you cook. I burn food. Make mess. Customers complain. Always complain. Sujin very angry. Then, no one come. Be quiet, Sujin. Makes me relax. Show me toast. Show me oatmeal. Show me eggs. Then, spices. Then...
What? What did he tell you?
Show Sujin quiet mind. Very quiet. Sujin see through food. Sujin see together. Marriage? No. Relationship. No good with words. You see.
Jack stood there baffled for a while Sujin went back to his stove. "Hey, Jack," a voice said behind him. It was Paul. "Sweep out the front when you get a chance." When Jack was done sweeping off the sidewalk, he took a moment and looked around. Leaning against the broom, he decided he wasn't used to the fresh air of the trees, so he lit up a cigarette. He just didn't like this place. And what was the deal with this mayor? Did he present himself as some kind of prophet? The One? How pretentious can you be? Jack's chest sunk a little just thinking of having to meet this guy, and the fact that he would be in charge of his rehabilitation. Jack's legs started to tremble. Like never before, he felt like running. Just then, he caught a spot of white out of the corner of his eye. A group of 5 or so adults were turning the corner, all dressed in hooded white robes. He only caught the image for a second, but he was sure he saw it this time. He started walking in their direction so he could get a peek around the corner of the block when Paul came out of the store. "Hey, Jack," he said. "I gotta make the rounds. Why don't you come with me?" Paul threw Jack his keys. Jack looked a little embarrassed. "I don't drive," said Jack. "City kid?" asked Paul understandingly. "City kid," replied Jack. Paul gave a friendly chuckle. "Just as well. I'm probably the only one who can make this old wreck run right." He gestured to a worn-down, old Ford pickup. Jack put the broom against the diner and took off his apron and followed Paul into the truck. Paul figured making his rounds with Jack would give him the lay of the land and introduce him to some folks around town. It was an eye-opener for Jack, who remained quiet most of the time. Jack was introduced to Bennett, an old blind gardener who had such a delicate touch. When he laid his hands on fruits and vegetables, they seemed to magically detach themselves from the plant without any resistance. He met Alice, the ranch hand who whispered in her chicken's ears, and moments later it would cluck and pop out an egg. Now Jack wasn't from the country, but he knew enough to sense what he was seeing wasn't quite right. Everyone seemed very friendly and down to earth, but sometimes the way they did things was just odd. Jack wasn't able to put a finger on it, but he was able to see the effect they had on their surroundings. Jack finally spoke up when he met Roy the butcher, who had used the same knife to cut meat for 30 years without sharpening it once, and as he demonstrated to Jack, could still split a hair. "So it's one of those Ginsu knives," said Jack. "Nope," said Roy matter-of-factly. "Just a knife." "Impossible," said Jack. "Actually, boy," said Roy a bit defensively, "it's easier than you think." "How?" said Jack combatively. Paul was a little unnerved with how upset Jack was getting. Roy took a deep breath and started talking. "You cut in between things. You move the knife with your whole body." The manner in which Roy was talking about cutting was, in a way, soothing, almost hypnotic as he thought about the action of cutting. And you go with the flow. The body moves the arm moves the knife, and the knife goes in the path of least resistance. Jack felt some sort of connection, an understanding with Roy of what he was talking about, almost as if words couldn't describe it, but could only point in the direction of what Roy really meant. "And that's what the One taught me," said Roy. Jack immediately snapped out of his connection with Roy. "Huh," said Jack in a huff. "Figures," and he stormed out to go wait in the truck. On the ride back, Jack was quiet and irritated. He realized that storming out of the butcher shop after insulting Roy, if not the parole officer, and then not helping Paul with the order, was subject to a direct violation of his parole. Jack had known people to be put back into prison for much less, but Jack just couldn't help himself. The One. He wasn't about to bow down to some know-it-all false prophet. Go ahead, he thought to himself. Send me back to prison. It's better than dealing with this backwards shantytown. Jack was fuming when Paul finally spoke up. "You know," Jack looked over at him. "Here it comes," thought Jack. Paul looked pensive, as if he was choosing his next words carefully. "Your parole officer is a lot of things." Paul paused and Jack waited. "And you should know that there are some people in this town who take him too seriously. Just try not to let that get to you." Paul and Jack didn't speak the rest of the way to the diner. When they arrived, they unloaded the truck, and when they were done, Paul asked Jack, "Same time tomorrow?" "Yeah," Jack replied, and walked off to his apartment in a bit of a daze.